Hi, and apologies for the difficulties.
No problem. We'll finally figure out Zoom perfectly just about the time we don't need it anymore.
I know, and I have to claim my Zoom ignorance. I don't have a full account, and I wound up working in the office for most of the pandemic and used Microsoft Teams. So
We'll get through it all, I'm quite sure.
okay.
And Joanne, I just literally, before I went into a Chamber of Commerce meeting the last hour, sent you a few comments for our discussion, and they're just meant to be ideas to throw out there for my colleagues to think about. But
They're wonderful, and I appreciate them. We'll be sure to discuss.
And Wade, you just got something too from me about an hour ago.
Yep, I saw it, Dan. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Is that Stella?
It is. I have a guest. We'll see how long this lasts, but this is Stella. So she has some separation issues. So she's in my office, clearly on my lap, thinking that we're a lap dog. So yes.
Oh,
My sweetie.
Joanne, are we waiting for a few others to join?
we are. I don't see our Woodland representatives yet.
I just sent a text or an email to Supervisor Sandy. He was having trouble, so I just sent him the link.
Great.
So
Thank
hopefully he'll be in shortly. But I'm not sure we have quorum yet.
And once Supervisor Sandy arrives, we do, but I'm really hoping Myra Vega or Rich Landsberg will be joining us from City of Woodland.
Yes, that would be nice. Oh, Supervisor Provenza's here too, so I'll let him in.
Joanne, should we proceed given that we've got Supervisor Provenza as one of the alternates? And I think we saw Myra Vega just joined. So I think we've got everyone we need.
Wonderful. I'm going to send a quick message to Supervisor Sandy. He just sent me one. He's still having difficulties with Zoom. My apologies, everyone. All right, Mayor Cohen, would you be able to lead us through the agenda, please?
Wade,
Oh,
you
you're up.
muted.
There we go, muted.
Sorry about that. We'll call the meeting to order at 2:08. And let's see, maybe we should have a roll call.
Yeah, I can take care of that for you. This is Julie. Okay, so Member Carson,
Carson present.
Member Cowan,
Here.
Member Vega.
Here.
Great. And Member Sandy, or Member Provenza.
I'm here. I'll sit in for Gary till he gets here.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, looks like we have enough for quorum.
Okay. Next item is approval of the agenda. Is there any changes to the agenda?
I'm happy to move the agenda without any amendments. Carson.
Okay.
Second, Provenza.
Okay, we have a second by Carson, or excuse me, a motion by Carson and a second by Provenza. Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Member Carson,
Carson, I.
Member Cowan,
Aye.
Member Vega,
Aye.
Member Provenza.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay. Next is to approve the minutes from the August 26, 2021 meeting.
Again, I'm happy to move approval without any changes. I didn't see any corrections.
Okay. Do we have a second? Somebody? I'll second it.
Oh.
Okay. All right, we have a motion from Carson and a second by Provenza to approve the minutes. Roll call vote, please.
Member Carson,
Carson, I.
Member Cowan,
Aye.
Member Vega.
I'll have to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, and Member Provenza.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 3 ayes and 1 abstain.
Okay. Moving on, we need to confirm the cancellation of the November 25th meeting due to Thanksgiving holiday and reschedule of the December 23rd meeting to December 2nd at 1 p.m. Does everybody just need to say they're okay with that, or we don't
think
need
so.
to vote on it, do we?
We're good.
Defer to Phil, but it was just more to make sure that the members were all aware and on board with that change.
Okay, sounds good. There we go. All right, next we're going to move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for anybody from the public to address the commission on items pertaining to us that are not on our current agenda. Do we have any public comment?
I don't show any hands raised, Chair.
And do we have any written comment?
I don't have any written comment, and I defer to Joanne if she has any.
And I wasn't sure if Lisa Gaines had raised her hand for comment.
I think she was raising it to get in as a panelist. Does she want to?
No, I wasn't a panelist and I didn't have any, I was muted, so I could only see you all one at a time. So they just changed my setting. So, but I was raising my hand as a comment just to ask if anybody had followed up from the cities to touch base with their constituency to find out what they felt kind of were the most important issues. I think that was the last thing we talked about. And I was hopeful that maybe we could touch base on that issue again. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. I guess we'll get to that at some point. We'll receive an update on the Animal Services Planning JPA work plan. And I think Van is gonna fill us in on that. Is that correct?
That's me, Van Hoosier.
Yeah.
So if we could please start the slides, Julie.
It
Yes.
appears we have Supervisor Sandy if we want to promote him to a panelist when the
okay,
clerk
let me-
has an opportunity.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and do that. And then I'll put up the slides. Just give me 1 second here.
Thank you.
Sure.
And as Julie's doing that, there's some preliminary slides I could just discuss. So what I'm really hoping to do today is to discuss where we are right now with the JPA. And there was sort of a map laid out for the JPA's tasks in terms of strategic planning and formulating a path forward for animal services. And I'm going to be proposing that we sort of pause the strategic planning aspect of that and really kind of create a baseline of understanding of current operations, because I feel like we would all benefit from all getting on the same page in terms of animal services, expenses, and current operations before we can sort of envision the path forward. So thank you so much, Julie. If we can move 2 slides. Okay. So first, I was just going to touch briefly on our current status. The first meeting was of this JPA was October 1st, 2020. So it's been about a year since the first meeting. Counting today's meeting, we've had 6 total meetings of this JPA. And, you know, it's been quite a year in many senses, and we've had some changes in the leadership at Animal Services in that period, some changes in the JPA board membership. And just, you know, I'm new to Yolo County and new to this role, but what I perceive is that it would really benefit the ability to make a strategic plan, to have sort of a baseline understanding of exactly where we are right now, what our expenses are, where the money's going, who's paying for what, how those expenses are anticipated to change over time, and exactly what services are being rendered right now. So I'm proposing that we alter the JPA's work plan to allow some time to establish that baseline understanding and then proceed with the strategic planning process. So if we go to the next slide. This was the original JPA work plan, and sort of the first step was developing a strategic plan. And the first steps of developing that strategic plan were introduced last December. But we had that meeting and then, you know, a number of changes. And so we never really got traction with that strategic plan developing process. But in just my observing of the different councils and board and from, you know, what I hear from the public, it seems like, you know, if we first had a really clear picture of where we are now in terms of operations. So Julie, if we could switch to the next slide. What I'm proposing to the JPA board members is that between now and February of 2022, that we establish a baseline understanding of the current state of animal services in Yolo County. So this will include fiscal and operational information to really see, okay, what are we getting now for our money? And then resuming that strategic planning process, saying, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to get, and how do we get there? So the timeline I'm envisioning, proposing, would be over the next few months, now through February, establishing that baseline understanding, then picking up the strategic planning process to really set those goals and vision for animal services in Yolo County, and then taking the next steps to see how we can get there in terms of making any changes to our current operations. And there would be planned check-ins with the city councils and board of supervisors at the end of all of these major phases. So if we can go to the next slide. If the board agrees with sort of getting a clear understanding of our current state first, these are some proposed items that I would develop to present to the board members. And so I wanted to get the board's feedback on, number one, whether kind of establishing that baseline information would be helpful to the JPA board members moving forward, and whether these information items or any additional information items would be helpful to your decision making. So I'll open it up for board member comments.
Okay, anybody got any comments? Mr. Carson.
Sure. So I've been jumping from meeting to meeting all week, and so I was only able to pull together a list of some suggested comments about an hour before this meeting began and before I went into another meeting. I have shared that with staff and I have shared that with the chair. First, I just say the items that I see here on this slide that was sent to us ahead of time do make sense to me. The general strategy of understanding where we are before we start making choices, strategic choices, makes sense to me. I have some items that overlap with these, some items that are not on this list, and a couple of items that I'm not sure whether they fit into this stage or not, that you can all judge. In terms of the items that definitely are focused on the current state of things, I'll just try to read this in abbreviated form, but a focus on updated information on staffing and vacancy trends in the existing department, on the fiscal impacts of those vacancies, and information on how any savings resulting from staff vacancies are reflected in adjustments, if any, are warranted in the contract payments the various jurisdictions are making. To flip it around another way, are we getting the staffing and the services the jurisdictions are paying for? We're all struggling with vacant positions, and since part of this operation is a law enforcement operation, we know the challenges we're having staffing up our own police department these days, and we're not where we want to be. And it's possible, since the sheriff's department plays an important role here, it would be good to understand how you're all doing. There's just not as many folks wanting to go into the business of policing as used to be, and it's made recruitment much harder. A separate item, I suggested that we try to get an understanding of what existing departmental costs are essentially fixed costs and which are variable costs. And the importance of this is to really get to understand what toggles we can hit that either increase the cost of this operation or potentially allow savings in this operation. But is the structure of the budget such that not much is variable? I mean, I'm not jumping to any conclusions here, but I'm saying that's the kind of information that's worth getting a better understanding on. This one is already on the list, essentially, where I reference getting a more detailed information on the current mechanism for allocating costs for animal services among the different jurisdictions in Yolo County, including the cost borne by the county itself, because it's got a responsibility for providing those services in unincorporated areas that are not within our city jurisdictions. And I'm just curious if what we're contributing, how well is it aligned with each jurisdiction's current share of costs, which is, I'm guessing, is an issue of interest to our friends in Woodland. But I think it's important for all of us to understand that. Also, on the point of how is the current operation going, I am just interested in a better understanding of the source of revenues used to support animal services, and how does that compare with the revenue sources that other similar departments elsewhere in the state rely upon? What are the places where we're exceeding expectations, and where could we do better in securing revenues that seem to be accessible to other agencies in California? Out-of-state comparisons usually aren't very good because we're living in Prop 13 and all of the complicated restrictions on how we tax and how fees are implemented and so forth. So other California comparisons would be of value. This one does start to get into, some of the strategic planning issues. So if you feel this one isn't ripe quite yet, my feelings wouldn't be hurt. But it does relate in part to how are you operating now? And I do have two on this list that maybe it's more in the realm of where I hope we can bring the analysis down the line. Because it does get to choices we could make. And none of these questions are meant to say, I made a decision that this is the right way to go. I have not done so. That's what these JPA discussions are all about. But I'm interested that when I was onboarded a few months ago and I asked for prior studies, there was a very interesting one that was done almost 10 years ago. It was called the Yolo County Animal Services Study. It had some consultants associated with the Animal Protection League. And among the things that that they did take a glimpse at were, to use their language, conversion of the current public departmental operation to privatization of animal services, either through the formation of a JPA or contracting with a humane society, creating a licensing unit that could aggressively and proactively pursue licensing compliance to promote responsible pet ownership and significant revenue increases. And it does reference the idea of that there might be some legal constraints on this, but could we in fact minimize the use of relatively high cost and very hard to hire law enforcement personnel? That report flagged the idea of trying to do a better job with recruiting volunteers and working with our partnerships. We do have volunteers and we do have partnerships, but what have other communities been able to do, and could we do better there than we are now? Ultimately, any new models, I hope, get the cost and benefit there should be compared with status quo. That's not to rule out a scenario in which we both enhance services and perhaps pay for more. I'm not making any choice there, but that's information down the line I would like to get. And then there is a new idea that was put on the table a couple of meetings ago by staff for a new program to improve the medical care we provide for both our own shelter animals and privately owned and held animals. I'm interested in learning more about that model and what it might cost, as well as staffing concerns. But I'm also interested in the comparison to what other models there might be that would rely more on partnerships for care, not only with UC Davis, but with private veterinarians who serve our communities. So that's my first shot at this on what information now or maybe down the line would move us ahead. And it's a lot there. And so I appreciate that just starting somewhere is important. And it may be we don't get everything all at once, but that's how I'm framing this in my mind. But I have no doubt that my colleagues can put forward other good ideas. And I have no problem at all if they take issue with any of those things I've thrown out there.
All right, thank you, Dan. I think you got it pretty well covered for all of us. It's like, you must not have a regular job.
I'm just a lazy retiree.
Yeah, but thank you for all that. I agree with pretty much most all of what you've outlined, and I like what Joanne's put together. I think we need to do this, and I think we need to get a grip on where we're at with everything now before we get into the rest of it, just like both of you have talked about. I personally think that's the way we need to go. Is there any other comment or remarks for staff or any public comment?
Sure. This is Myra Vega. So I just want to
Yes,
call
Myra.
Dan, I think you got everything in the kitchen sink. I had some notes jotted down and you got them covered. So I appreciate staff's time in putting this together and kind of recognizing that we do need to take a step back and kind of get a level set where we are now and do a internal assessment, if you will, combined with a little bit of the pieces. I like some of the portions that Dan mentioned around looking at what other communities are doing. I think that how we compare to other communities, just so we can get a sense of where we are now. So I appreciate that. Dan, thank you.
You're most welcome. I would just ask staff, I wanted to avoid any Brown Act complications. And so I think it works for staff to share the memo I sent in. And I shared with staff and with Wade for others that are part of this process.
Okay, do we have any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead.
I just finally got in the meeting. I apologize. Technology had me down on the floor by the neck, and it was a struggle. So I just wanted to echo, in particular, one of Dan's comments resonated with me, which is volunteers, etc. Stephanie can tell you in detail that COVID has had and I know we all hear that all the time, but marked impact on volunteers in particular at the shelter. We've recently received some critical letters from people who don't seem cognizant of that fact, but in fact, our staff there have been careful to try to safeguard everyone's health during this difficult time. And the inability to rely on high school kids to come in and help, the reliability to just funnel volunteer staff in and out, or the difficulties or the challenges with that has had a marked impact on this shelter, as has COVID in general had a marked impact on animal distribution and other unanticipated aspects here. So taking a step back, trying to take a new view of this, I think would be advantageous for the future. And I echo those remarks.
Thank you, Gary. Anybody else?
Yes.
Jim, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. And I'm here as an alternate and happy to cover for Gary initially. But I just wanted to give a little historic perspective because I was involved in the predecessor organization or meetings before the JPA was established. And there was discussion in two areas. The one I think everyone knows about is the idea of building a new shelter. And that was as a result of a county facilities report that concluded that the shelter was inadequate and that it affected the ability to deliver services and would need to be replaced. But within that, there were a number of studies, and recently heard people citing some pretty large numbers for a new shelter, but there were also some proposals that the consultants went into for less expensive alternatives. So there were several alternatives out there, and I think it would be important to look at all those reports and possibilities. The other thing that was discussed early on was a possibility of a different governance, the idea of the JPA being the governance for the shelter. And one of the reports even, I think it was the UC Davis report, even talked about the possibility of someone else being involved in terms of running the shelter instead of the sheriff, having a humane society or other group. And that model does exist in other areas. That was not really pursued, but it might be worth taking a look at in terms of how the costs compare and so forth. Of course, there's always a role that the sheriff, in terms of responding to problematic animals that are out in the community or the rural areas, that still has to occur, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the sheriff's wheelhouse in terms of a shelter. And so there's quite a lot of work that was paid for by the county that was out there. And I'd asked my staff to forward some that I could find, and I'm still looking for more. And we'll send that to your staff. But I think it would make sense to review that material, some of the work that's already been done, because it sounds like going over material that was considered. You probably have to consider it again, but those options are out there. And then the third thing I wanted to point out is level of service, the number of service calls from each community is a factor. And, you know, for example, Davis has much fewer service calls than Woodland or West Sacramento. And the question is, well, why is that? What are they doing? What could be done in other areas? Because that could affect the overall cost. So if you're looking at a new shelter or a different shelter, then you might want to look at, well, what can be done in terms of reducing service calls in the various communities. So those are just some points to consider, and I'll continue to have my staff forward over any other materials that we find from the old days. But Joanne, you probably have a lot of it, and to the extent that we have something that may not be there in the archives, I'm happy to forward it over.
Thank you, Supervisor Provenza. And those previous reports are definitely informing my current studies, as well as audit reports from other jurisdictions. You know, I'm a management analyst here at Yolo County, but my background is as a government performance auditor with the County of Ventura and City and County of San Francisco. So I kind of have that mentality with my different pieces of analysis. And actually, I think I have solved a minor mystery about the lower calls for service from Davis that I can share if everybody's interested. So I was able to obtain reports breaking down the calls of service by call type and jurisdiction. And I noticed that for some types of calls, like for rabies related concerns, there's a proportional amount from all of the cities. So Davis has even more calls regarding rabies related items than they do for Woodland, for example. But on certain types of calls, there were almost, you know, there were half of the calls for service from Davis as opposed to like Woodland. And I believe that's because Davis PD might be responding to some of those calls that would otherwise get routed to animal services, because Davis has their own separate dispatch for law enforcement. And so those calls come in, they get routed to Davis PD rather than to animal services. And then all of the other jurisdictions participate in the YECA 911 center, and any calls that go into that call center get routed to animal services. So that is my, you know, there's I think strong evidence, but you know, probably many factors, but a significant one is the difference in how calls are dispatched between Davis and the rest of the county.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to point out that I failed to mention one of my points. Supervisor Provenza appropriately raised the shelter issue, and that there has been a great deal of work done in that area, and that certainly it's clearly the province of this JPA to look at shelter issues. One question I did have, though, is this department has had some successes with its partners and has done some remarkable things in reducing the number of cats, especially coming to this shelter. Some success also, I believe, on reducing the number of dogs that need to come to us. It did make me wonder whether it's worth a fresh look to assess what is the amount of shelter space we need or could need if we took these successes even further. That's not to say we don't need a shelter. It's not to say we may not need to improve our shelter. But it is one of the things on my list that I'd like to learn more about at some point.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Chair Sandy.
I apologize, Mr. Chair, but I wanted to see how much I appreciated Jim's remarks. It's always helpful to have someone who actually possesses ancient history on the board. So thank you, Jim, for serving as our repository of all things that have ever occurred after the earth cooled. But we do need to go back. You're exactly right, Jim, and look at those studies. I know Stephanie in particular has looked at some new ways of renovating and moving things around out there that would fall short of requiring the building of a new shelter. I encourage any of you who haven't been out there to go out there and take a tour. It's a great educational issue. And so you're exactly right. We should go back and revisit those, what has been proposed previously, and then hear some of the new ideas that have emerged in the wake of her experiences out there, because there may be faster, cheaper, better alternatives. And if it requires governance from a private separate agency, that's one. I think all the cards should be on the table, and including looking at new designs, structures, etc. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment? Is Lisa Gaines still out there?
Yeah, she has her hand raised.
Okay.
So let me go ahead and let her talk.
Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, guys. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
So I am currently, as we're talking, I'm sharing information with Dr. Janine Berger. She's one of the heads of the San Francisco Animal Shelter and has multiple degrees in animal welfare, as well as being a veterinary surgeon. I've asked her if she would be willing to talk to us as a group and answer some questions about what works and what doesn't. She's been at San Francisco for the last 10 years and runs a veterinary clinic in Winters that gets a lot of animals. So if everybody approves of that, I'd like to invite her.
I think it would be good to hear from her.
Yep, that'd be great, Lisa. Thank
Okay.
you.
And then I'm more than happy to help gathering some information, having worked with a lot of other programs in other counties in California from San Diego to here, so that we can look at some other perspectives. And Dan and Jim and Gary, I really appreciate all of your comments. I just hope we don't take too long to go backwards and look at everything, but I do agree that we need current information. My only concern about the information that we have is it's 13 years old, and not only have the philosophies on animal sheltering and housing changed in the last 10 years significantly, but still have a lot of other things. So I think that we need to review all of that with just the understanding that a lot of it is not really relevant to the way that we're dealing with animals and the issues we deal with today.
They're great insights, Lisa. Great insights.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank all of you for continuing to work on this. It's been a long time, and I know sometimes I get frustrated, but I appreciate the time and energy you're putting into it.
Well, you have every right to be frustrated, because you've put so much work into it. And we're all grateful for that.
Well, and to Stephanie as well. I mean, we've all worked very hard, so our hearts are in it. We just need to be thoughtful and not emotional.
That's right. And I'm
Agreed.
grateful as well for Joanne's great analytical work on the Davis PD calls. That bears some further exploration.
Thank you, Joanne.
Yep. Thank you very much. All right. Was there any other public comment?
I don't see any additional hands raised, Chair.
Okay. All right. Well, if nobody has any further comments, then I think we can adjourn.
Yes, and we'll see you December 2nd.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a good Thanksgiving.
You too.
Oh, good.
Bye.
You too. Wait. Happy Thanksgiving.
Can we have Halloween first?
Too late.
Bye, everybody.